Hello, Adam. Thanks very much for joining me again on the show.
Carl, thanks for having me on again.
It's becoming our annual chat, this, I think, isn't it? I think we've spoken two or three times before, but the feedback's always been fantastic and people really resonate with what you have to say and the way you sort of get people to focus on the right areas. The more I've looked at it in the last few years, the more I keep being drawn to the concept of developing skill and then being able to access that skill when you need it most on the golf course. What would you say your definition of skill would be?
God, you put me on the spot. So I sometimes change it a little bit, but I suppose your ability to do what you're intending to do.
Mm.
So technique is what you're doing,
Yeah.
but skill is the ability to do what you're intending. So I suppose a big differentiator would be if you're hitting the toe or hitting the center or hitting the heel, that is what technique you're producing, or how you're moving your body even is the technique. That's what we typically think of when we think of technique. But what are you intending to do? So, for example, if I hit the toe, but I intended to do that, we'll talk about why. But
Mm.
if I hit the toe and I intended to do that, I'm actually demonstrating high skill.
Yeah.
Or I always use a video of McIlroy hitting a top shot. Have you seen those videos that TaylorMade have been doing a lot of them where they get the top pros and they sometimes do, they watch them practice, they listen in on the discussions, and sometimes they'll do a little challenge like how far can you top it? Or
Yeah.
how short can you top it?
Yeah.
And they're actually pretty good at that. So it's demonstrating high skill. So obviously it's poor technique
Mm.
hitting the top of the ball, but very high skill to be able to just nip the top millimeter.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, or you could look at things like your ability to hit more left and more right at will, your ability to hit the ground in different places, different depths. So,
Mm.
can you hit the ground in the same place and do it with a shallow divot, or hit the ground in the same place with a deeper divot, or can you even hit the ground in incorrect places? So, some of these skills are things that you might not want to produce on the
Mm.
golf course when it's time for performance. It's like, why would you ever want to hit the toe? Well,
Mm.
when it's time to perform on the golf course, no, you don't want that. But as a skill to learn and develop, it can actually become very powerful for you. So, if ever I warm up and if ever I shank a shot, you can be guaranteed it won't be a shank for the next one.
Mm.
Why? Because I've developed the skill of hitting more towards the toe. So I can kind of call upon that feel if needed.
Mm.
So yeah.
So skill then leads to adaptability, doesn't it? The ability to sort of notice what's going on and then adapt to what we have day to day. And as we've talked about before, I mean, the biggest myth that's pushed at people is consistency, and we know that doesn't exist. Everybody's experiences it doesn't exist, but they still keep
Mm.
seeking it. However, when you go down the route of adaptability, then I think that's a route that can actually lead to a sense of capability on the golf course and being able to deal with whatever comes along.
Yeah, well, you actually don't want to be too consistent
Mm.
because, if you put a robot, for example, we spoke on our podcast the other day to Gene Parente, and he's got a golf robot, and so it's used for testing clubs. But if you stick that on a different lie, ball above your feet, ball below your feet, or if you didn't adjust it for the wind, for example, then you're going to be too consistent. You're not going to be able to adapt to the lie that you're given, and it's going to be quite a poor result. You need to hit the ball higher, lower sometimes, and even the robot. Interestingly, he talked about how the robot has a dispersion to it as well. So there's
Right.
even when you're hitting robot, there's like a 20-foot left and right average dispersion just because of the quality of the golf balls, things like that. So, you need to adapt your strategy. Even, if the pin's on the left, you need to aim it, buffer it a little bit more towards the middle of the green. I mean, that might be a good rule of thumb, buffer everything more towards the middle of the green because you
Mm.
ultimately can't control where the ball goes. But yeah, I mean, being too consistent will hurt you because as golfers, every day we wake up and we've got different patterns. Or even if we have the same pattern, the severity of that pattern might change.
Yeah.
If you tend to suffer with a slice, for example, some days you might wake up and it's a buttery fade, and those are the days you play your best. Other days you'll wake up and it's a 50-yard slice, and you need to be able to adapt to that and change it and bring it back into play. And so this is where, skill training, which is basically play and feel building, can work. That's why I always, I say this a lot. I always laugh at people who say, "Oh, you can't teach feel." And I'm like, "Yes, you can.
Mm.
You can teach feel."
Yeah. 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 You can teach feel if your attention's in the right place. So when you go to play, Adam, when you warm up, what does that look like in terms of go in there with a mindset of is it a mindset of let's see what I've got today and then start to adapt from that?
Yeah, exactly. It's basically a problem solving process. And that's exactly how I teach golf. I don't teach golfers. I don't fix swings
Mm.
necessarily. What I do is I teach them how to solve problems. So a lot of that is identifying the problem for a start. So when I'm warming up, I don't know what pattern I'm going to get. I can guess what pattern it will be. It will tend to be some level of fat, some level of toe, and some level of left
Yeah.
usually. So those are, but I don't know to what severity.
Mm.
Often I'll start warming up and I'm like, oh, everything's lining up today. But
Mm.
some days I'm like, oh, that fat contact is starting to shift a little bit too far back. So just your ability to identify what's happening at impact, which is kind of an external thing.
Mm.
It's not very swing focused. I'm not thinking about, oh, is my arm doing this today or my
Mm.
body doing this today? I'm thinking, right, how is that club actually moving through impact to create that ball flight? So the identification part is kind of key.
Mm.
And then once you've got the problem identified, if there is a problem, then having a list of tools to draw upon.
Yeah.
And they could be technical tools. If you're hitting it fat, you could say, all right, let's feel as if my weight is a little bit more on the left side. But I personally believe that everybody should be developing the ultimate tool, which is what I call intention. Your skill. So the ability to say, right, I'm hitting the ground too far behind. Let's hit it farther
Yeah.
forwards.
Yeah.
And obviously, to people who've never done this type of training, they're like, well, what does that feel like? I don't know. And so that then you go into, okay, well, how do we develop these fields? How do so say, for example, if you ask me, hit it more from the toe, I can do it
Mm.
just by thinking, hit it more from the toe.
Yeah.
Don't ask how. I
Mm.
know how to do that, but
Mm.
I don't even know what changes when I
Mm.
do that. If I videoed my swing before, and if I take a really deep analysis of it, I can say, okay, yeah, I can see some changes here and there, but I'm not thinking of those
No.
things when I'm
No.
actually in the act of it. In fact, a little trick I do for people is I make a backswing and I get people to call out toe or heel in the backswing. And I can do it pretty much every single time. I can't control it as precisely
Mm.
because you're adjusting on the fly. But if someone says heel to me, I'll hit the heel. So just my ability to change the outcome, change how the club is presented through intention alone is something that I've built. And how
Mm.
have I built that? Well, I built it through specific tasks. Like I've literally gone off with a bucket of 60 balls, 100 balls, and said, right, let's try and hit the toe for the next half hour.
Mm.
Let's try and hit the heel for the next half hour. And then using very good feedback. Foot spray will do
Mm.
that. And so after, the first time you do that, you might not be able to do the task. I remember the first time I tried to hit the heel, I just could not. I
Right.
couldn't get it towards the heel.
Right.
I could move it in that general direction, but I couldn't cross over the boundary and, actually heal it. But now, I can do it and I can control it in certain amounts as well. Like if
Mm.
I'm on a GC quad that measures it in millimeters, I can say, right, I'm going to hit this one 5 millimeters heel. I'm going to hit this 10 millimeters heel, 15 millimeters heel, and get it within relatively precise amounts either side of that. I
Mm.
actually do demonstrations of this on YouTube as well, just to show that these things are possible. Because I hate that. I hate that phrase. Lots of technical instructors use this. They say impact happens too fast to change it.
Mm.
And it's like, well, yeah, but you also can set up to the ball and spend 5 minutes building the intention to do something.
Mm.
It's like, yes, you can't really be a foot before impact and say to yourself, oh, this is going to hit the toe, I better
Mm,
correct it. No, that's
mm,
not how we do it.
mm.
But what you have to do is you have to say, right, what are my patterns? Right. And almost everybody has patterns. It's
Patterns.
very rare that I see someone without a pattern. So you have to say, right, what are my patterns? What is the average? Is the average too much from the toe? Okay, I have to go in with the intention to hit more towards the heel. So you're trying to
Mm,
balance patterns, basically.
mm,
And yes, skill work is super good for doing that.
mm. And would you say when you're doing that, your actual attention is on the club head?
Yeah, fully external. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really club head based. I'm thinking about where I'm swinging the club in space.
Mm,
So, you can take the ball and you can imagine a space that's a little farther from the ball.
mm,
Sometimes I'll even put objects on the ground. If someone's really looking at me baffled when I say, "Can you try and hit it more towards the toe?"
mm,
If they're really looking baffled and they can't do it, I'll place an object on the ground like a little guitar pick or maybe a tee.
yeah.
And if I place that object closer to us, closer to the feet of the player, so you got the ball and then you got the tee a little closer to their feet. Once you change their intention to hit that object instead of the ball, they're effectively going to swing the club closer to their feet, which relates to a toe shot.
Mm,
And so that is a way of, using your intention to change the impact.
mm,
And then after a while of doing that, they don't need the crutch of the object there. They can just, they develop whatever feel, however they're sensing it. Um, Similarly, I've done it where I've placed guitar picks in front of the ball,
yeah.
or I use a divot board, which is good feedback. So a divot board is a little hitting board that has sequins on it, so you can see exactly where the club is landing on the ground.
Maybe the best training device of all time, I think.
I would say so, yeah. Very, very simple, but amazing feedback. And yeah, it's great because you can take the ball away and then you can say, right, can you hit 6 inches in front, 4 inches in front, 2 inches in front? And so you develop those feels with players. And the interesting thing, because we know feel isn't real, is that it's very often that when someone is trying to hit 2 or 4 inches in front, those are the swings that actually hit the desired spot, would
Yeah.
be ball length turf. And then they have that discrepancy at first. They're like, oh God, I'm trying to hit 4 inches in front, but that's exactly what I need to do to hit a good shot. And so it's a little bit disconcerting for the player at first because they're like, oh, but this feels so weird to try and hit that far in front. But what they find is over time, once they do that, the feel and the real start to match up a little
Yeah.
better and it doesn't feel as weird.
Mm,
But even then, there are days where I'm hitting it maybe an inch behind it or so, and I'll just say, right, I'm going to try and hit an inch in front or a couple of inches in front. I just push that intention. And
mm,
the first time you do these things, it can be super uncomfortable.
mm,
Because say for example, you're hitting the shank and you need to hit it more out of the toe. Well, the first time you do that, there's this internal battle of, well, I don't actually want to hit it at the
yeah.
toe. I don't want to do the opposite fault. And so this is why training these skills are so important.
Mm,
Because if the first time you do these things is on the course, you're not going to be able to do it. Your
mm,
brain is going to resist that. So you need to develop your ability to do it on the range. You need to know, okay, this much of that feel moves it this
mm,
much.
mm,
It's very common with face strike changing. I find with most people, they're underdoers of it. So say they
mm,
have a shank pattern and I ask them to hit it towards a toe, an extreme feel on their behalf usually moves it 5 millimeters towards the toe.
mm,
And so, they really have to overdo that feeling. Whereas something like maybe club face direction, people might overdo that a little bit more.
mm,
So, and there are ways of figuring out whether you're an overdoer or underdoer as well. I mean, just looking at the data, really. I usually get their 10 ball test first in at the start of a lesson. I try not to give them the feedback. I try and
mm,
let them just hit shots. And then at the end of it, we look at the feedback and I say, well, look, your average pattern is 10 millimeters towards the heel.
yeah.
And I say those 10 millimeters, they work, but they're not great.
Mm,
But also everybody has a little bit of a side to side pattern around their average, right? So if this player is 10 millimeters average on the heel, Some of their shots will be a little closer to the sweet spot, and those will be their best days.
Mm,
Some of them will be a little closer to their heel, and those will be the ones that may nip the shank. And then
mm.
they think, oh God, I'm inconsistent. And the reality is, you just need to shift that whole pattern more towards the center. And so that even your bad shots are now still much more acceptable or even better.
Would you say though that for a lot of people, it's probably for the first time they've been making golf swings where they're actually observing what is actually happening as opposed to telling themselves how to move in certain ways. They've got this in, I think most people's experience of golf is an internal conversation telling the body how to move in a certain way based on some other input, be it YouTube or whatever from somebody else.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. I don't know because I haven't studied and I probably should study other sports more.
Mm.
Um, but it seems like golf is very, very internal. I mean, there's a baseball player I play with and he's super internal in golf. And I said, would you think like that when hitting a baseball? And he's like, yeah, I would. I'm trying to get my elbow here. I'm like, yeah, and there's a part of that that can be valuable. Say for example, if someone's making a swing that's going to cause them injury,
Yeah.
there's a part of it that
Yeah.
you can say, all right, let's move better. And I also think that technical or internal thinking can be a tool,
Mm.
but again, if used in the right amounts, in the right place, at the right dose, I do just a very small amount of technical training. Maybe 1% of my training is
Really?
technical, whereas yeah, most of it is external now. It's focusing on that club and ball. I'm either playing around with those variables or trying to calibrate it.
But do you not think, Adam, that out on the golf course, the biggest, not the biggest, but one of the major causes of anxiety that people suffer is that they hit poor shots, which is inevitably gonna happen. And then the brain straight away goes into what did I do? What caused that shot? And if you
Hmm.
then go into this deep sea of potential things that you might have done with your body, you just get down a dark, long, black tunnel that you may not emerge from. But at least if you, in your terms, if you're focusing on the big three, you're actually right at the scene of the crime. So the actual explanation for poor shots becomes more solid. And with that explanation, then becomes a resilience to be able to sort of respond to whatever's happening.
Yeah, it becomes simpler when you look at impact. I'm okay with people asking the question, what went wrong with that? But again, I want it to lead to the impact
But
variables.
that's what I meant. If
Yeah,
you ask
they're
the
external.
if you ask the question what's wrong, and your only source of answers to what's wrong is a million different ideas about what you may or may not have done with your body, that's never going to lead you anything to any productive area, is it? If the question is about what did I do relative to impact with the big three, then I think you're at least homing in on the scene of the crime.
Exactly, yeah. And I like that analogy, the scene of the crime. So yeah, I mean, you look at the ball flight is going to tell you was it a good shot or bad shot, and then you say, okay, well, if it was bad, what was the cause of that? And go to impact, because like you
Mm,
said, that's the scene of the crime. That is the thing that causes
yeah.
100% the outcome. Now, what people mostly do is they jump over the impact laws, they skip over that and they go straight to swing.
Mm,
And the problem with that is, I mean, several problems with it. Number one, you may never know what changed in the mechanics. And I do loads of posts on social media about about this. So, for example, when you snap hook a ball with a driver, if I ask someone, what do you think changed there? They'll say, oh, I did this huge move, and they'll show me this incredibly different swing that didn't happen at
yeah.
all. They say they felt that, but it didn't happen. The reality is when we look at launch monitor numbers, for every degree that the club face is offline, the ball will go around about 10 to 15 yards offline, depending on how far you're hitting it. The average person will see around about 12 yards offline for every one
One
degree.
degree. 1 degree.
Yeah. So when you miss it left in the rough, it's 24 yards, 25 yards offline. That's 2 degrees that you presented the club different from a shot that would have gone down the target. Now, I've shown pictures of here's a square club face, here's
Mm.
2 degrees open or closed. And most people can't even tell which
No,
one's which.
no.
So visually, it's very, very difficult to see. And we've got to manage that while swinging the club at 90, 100, 110 mile an hour around our body in a 20-foot circle. So it's incredible that we can even do this for a start. So that helps us manage expectations a little bit. When I hit one in the rough, I used to self-flagellate as a kid, but now I'm like, it is what it is. It was
Two
two
degrees.
degrees. Yeah. But then it goes into, okay, well, how do we change these things? And what I found is that when you try and change these things by mechanics, by thinking about body
Mm,
positions,
mm.
you will tend to overdo it a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah,
It's easy to overdo it because, like, if you went from, well, people can't see this, but if you went from here to here, I'm showing that's like 5 degrees of wrist flexion. I'm
yeah.
barely moving my wrist at all. To try and control that consciously is very difficult. And also, I mean, most of the studies on this showed that when we think about a body part, even if, and that is a big if, even if we get control over that body part, the other contributing body parts all fall to bits.
Yes, yeah.
So, a good analogy for that is a study of darts. I forget the name of the people. It'll come to me, but they asked players to either focus on the outcome of the dart, so throwing darts towards a dartboard, just focus on where the dart lands, or to focus on making a consistent arm motion.
Mm,
And what they found was when they asked players to focus on the arm motion did get more consistent,
yeah.
but the outcome got worse.
Mm,
So you're like,
mm,
well, wait, that doesn't make sense at all. How can the arm motion become more consistent, but the outcome get worse? Well, actually, our body is constantly making adjustments. So say the body and the brain sense that one part is out of position or has changed, the brain will make a corresponding change to a different part. So we can actually get into a situation where the arm motion is less consistent, but it's less consistent in a good way.
mm,
They're all working together. So one thing changes negatively, so another thing changes an equal amount to balance it.
mm,
And that's actually a good thing. For years we've thought, and many people still do, we think that variability in the movement or inconsistency in the movement is a bad thing.
no,
And it's no, if that
mm,
inconsistency is working for you,
mm,
it's actually helpful. So a good analogy for this is if you're driving your car down the road, if you were to lock the steering wheel in place, like it was rigid and it couldn't
mm.
move, yeah, that's going to be a consistent car motion, but you're going to
Very
crash into a
dangerous.
bunch. Yeah, because even on a straight road, right, if that's just a little bit out, you eventually far enough down the road, you're gonna hit something.
Mm,
Not to mention there are objects that we have to get around, which is, environmental adaptability. Whereas the reality is, if you are really driving a car, you're constantly moving the wheel back and forth.
mm,
So you'd say, okay, well, this is a less consistent movement of the wheel because we're adding more variability, but because it's good variability, it actually
mm,
helps us keep down the road. So, an alien or a helicopter looking down at the cars would say, oh, look, those cars are all going in a straight line. They must be locked in place, but they don't see the internal variability of the driver moving the
mm,
steering wheel.
mm,
So variability or inconsistency in the movement is not always a bad thing. In fact, you can, I think there are studies that have tried to separate these out, what is good variability and what's bad variability. And they see the better players have more good variability.
mm,
There's one study in particular. I have to find these because these are things I looked at years ago and I've forgotten the name of it. But there's one study in particular that found that with better players, the rate of variability actually increased just before impact.
mm.
So it was almost like just before impact, those players were self-correcting.
Right.
They club face was more offline and they were correcting it to get it back online. No one
Really?
knows how we do
Right.
this. Yeah, no
Yeah.
no one knows how we do this. I mean, there are a few different explanations for it, but in terms of motor learning, the uncontrolled manifold hypothesis, the brain is constantly auto-correcting. And it's not a conscious process either. It's almost more reflexive
But just
because
on that point, though, surely the case is true that if our brain, if our mind is overloaded with technical do's and don'ts, our ability to engage the genius of the body to do the things that you're talking about has to be compromised then, doesn't it?
yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it logically, well, I shouldn't say that really. It's not it's there's a lot of counterintuitive parts to this, but I would say when you give your brain a global goal, you plug in the GPS coordinates. This is where I want to go.
Mm,
Your brain acts like the GPS and finds a route there. Even if you go off course,
mm,
it will create a new route for you.
mm,
And so, the GPS that we should want to create is what do I want this club to do through impact?
mm.
Because if that's the thing that causes the result, let's
Let's
make that
home
the
in there.
goal.
Mm,
Yeah, and then adjust it from there if needed. And your brain can then it's like the darts thing, right? When you focus on where you want the dart to go, the body will start to coordinate all the moving soup of pieces into into achieving that goal. I mean, depending on what your beliefs are, billions of years of evolution have helped this, at least millions of
mm.
evolution have helped us determine this. I don't really see the caveman throwing the spear at the woolly mammoth thinking, right, I need to get my right elbow into more external rotation.
Yeah.
It's that person would have died out very quickly, but obviously
After
we've
he'd worked with
developed
the
these
spear
joints.
throwing coach for an hour before he went to secure lunch.
Yeah, exactly. Put himself on a kinematic sequence for spear throwing.
Mm,
I mean, yeah, that caveman might have died out very quickly or gone very hungry.
mm,
So, but yeah, it's interesting, why are we so enamored by
yeah.
these things? And I think a lot of that stems from the fact golf is super difficult. And when something is very difficult or the rules are not clear, humans get very, very superstitious.
Mm,
And lots of what golfers do can look like superstition to me, or a rain dance. I did an analogy the other day of it's like a rain dance, right? Where what was it, Native Americans, they wanted rain, so they would dance in a certain way to make the gods make it rain. And it worked every time because they just kept dancing until it rained,
yeah.
right? But it
Yeah.
wasn't, obviously, we know the dance wasn't causing the rain.
Yeah.
And golfers often enter rain dances, right? Because they're like, oh, I'm going to do this with my swing. And they'll do that rain dance. They'll try this thing. They'll hit bad shot, bad shot, bad shot. But inevitably, a good shot is going to come.
Mm,
And then they might make false correlations or
yeah.
causations with, okay, maybe that little rain dance there or that swing thought caused this good shot. Okay, let's do it again. And you can,
Go on and
like
on.
I said, if the root's not clear, you can get yourself into a hell of a mess. Which is why I spend a lot of time just educating golfers on, there are no rain dances. It's
Mm,
this causes this, right?
mm.
If you hit the ground in the right place and the center of the face, and that face is looking in a good orientation, you are going to hit a good shot,
And it doesn't matter how
right?
you're feeling, how you're thinking, or any of those things. If the physics of impact are correct, you're going to hit a good shot.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, while, I think, psychology is definitely important. The ball and the physics of it is not. I would say the psychology is important as much as it affects impact.
Mm,
So, if I'm on the golf course and I'm fearful of the right side
mm,
and then I snap hook it left, it wasn't necessarily my fear that created it. It was a closed face that
yeah.
created it. But you could say that yes, the fear created the closed face. So all these things are mixing in, but we've
But I would say in that, my experience is that, for whatever certain situations will trigger certain emotions and feelings and sensations on the golf course, but you can have the intention in those situations to do something with the golf club. And in the presence of feeling discomfort, you can still carry out your intention if it's clear enough.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, a next level analysis of this is to say, okay, when I'm feeling X, I tend to do Y.
Yeah.
So for example, if I'm feeling nervous, I tend to hit it more left. I
Right.
know that. So
Mm.
when I notice those feelings, okay, I'm feeling a little nervous today, I will just feel a swing where the face is a little bit more open. And I've developed those feels. I actually do drills where I hit it a little bit right, a mid amount right, a lot right. On a launch monitor, I'll say, right, I'm going to present the face 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees open. So I've got those feels
Brilliant.
locked in.
Yeah.
So if ever I'm on the golf course, I'm like, oh God, I'm nervous here, and I tend to miss left when I'm nervous. I could do something simple like adjust my strategy, just aim a
Mm.
little bit more at the right side of the course, or I could make a swing where I feel like, okay, I'm going to try and feel the face 1 or 2 degrees more open here. Um, and that can be true as well when if there's danger on the right and you tend to snap hook it. I mean, there's a part of that that's actually helpful, right? If there is danger on the right, you're probably better off missing left. But if you feel like it's too big of a problem, yeah, you can implement that feel of,
Mm.
right, I'm going to try and present the face a little bit more open just to neutralize that tendency of mine. So it gives you a focus. It's still external, but it helps neutralize your patterns.
And do you use technology? I know I'm going to answer the question here, but do you use technology in the sense of when you hit a shot with when you're on TrackMan or whatever, you'll sense that the club is 1 or 2 or 3 degrees open, and then check the monitor to back that up, as opposed to going straight to the monitor to see what's happened.
Yeah, so what I do is, even though I have a GC quad, which is an expensive device that gives me face and path to the nth degree, I still like people to focus on the ball flight. Okay,
Mm.
I think there's something unique about that. It helps our brain because the thing is, if you encode the information and the movement with launch monitor numbers. Once that launch monitor is taken away, it can be like you feel very naked.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're encoding the movement and your thoughts and your feels with the ball flight, if the
Mm.
brain is making those connections, just like Pavlov's dogs, that's always going to be there for you when you're on the golf course as well. So I think the transference is better with that. So when I'm analyzing results, even though I've got a launch monitor running, spitting out those numbers, I don't focus on them.
Mm.
I actually say, okay, that ball was 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers right or left. So
Okay.
just like aim point for putting. So I use that system.
Mm.
I've just adapted that for full swing. Um, and so I do I do use numbers occasionally when it comes to face strike. So I say, okay, this was 10 millimeters off the heel. This was 5 millimeters off the heel. So I do use that. I find that transfers okay. But I prefer face spray or foot spray,
Mm.
Daktaring or Dr.
Mm.
Scholl's foot spray because you get the visual of it rather
Yeah.
than the number part. Um, and then with ground contact, the divot board is great for that, or just looking at your divot, right? And something people can do on the course is when they have their ball resting in the fairway, just place a little tee next to it. And after you hit your shot, make sure you make your normal swing, but look
Mm.
down after you hit the shot, and then you can just assess, okay, did I hit that behind, too far in front? Was I
Brilliant.
not deep enough, too
Mm.
deep? Another version I use a lot now if people are on range mats because you can't see the divot. And if they don't have a divot board, just spray the face. And not only can you see toe or heel, but you can also see the vertical strike, whether it's high or low on the face.
Yes.
I've been doing a lot of geometry on this using models, and I found that depends on the club, but about the third to fourth groove up, if the middle of your ball mark is about the third to fourth groove up, that correlates very highly to a good ground contact as well.
Yeah.
And for every groove higher than that, that correlates to about an inch farther back. So say the fourth groove is ideal and you hit the sixth groove, it's very likely you started ground contact about 2 inches behind the ball.
So you fatted it
Um,
basically.
Yeah, exactly. So you can look and say, oh, this is high in the face. That must have been fat. And it's kind of logical when you think about it, but no one ever does that analysis in their own
Mm.
game.
Mm.
So it's a super simple way of gauging ground contact as well. So yeah, with ground contact, I like to think about depth a lot. so just the depth that you're going through, because that relates as well to where you hit the ground. So if you took 100 golfers and said, right, I want you to dig deeper, not only would they dig a deeper divot, but it would also tend to be farther back.
Mm.
Actually, some geometry on this as well. It's about an 8-to-1 ratio. So for every inch that you drop deeper, you'll hit about 8 inches behind, which is incredible if you think about
Right.
it. Um, yeah, it's really scary if you think about it, right? No one ever hits 8 inches behind, but if you hit just a quarter of an inch deeper,
Mm.
right, which is a couple of grooves higher on the face, that's 2 inches behind the ball. And that's going to be the difference between a good shot and a really bad one. So it's quarter of an inch is not a lot really. But again, when we give a golfer this global goal of can you control the height that the
Yeah.
club goes through impact, they're actually very good at it.
Yeah.
Once we tap into that, we're incredibly good at it.
Mm.
And it can be trained even further. But even complete beginners, I get them and I say, can you make a swing where you brush the tops of the grass? Now make a swing where you brush the middle of the grass. Now make a swing where you take the base of the grass. Now take the roots out. People can control that super well. And you're effectively controlling the swing by like
Yeah.
half an inch or
Mm.
eighth of an inch increments, maybe.
Mm.
So, tapping into that external focus and actually using it.
Mm.
When you make your practice swing and you're like, oh God, that was a little deep. I better try and pick it a little bit more. If you're fatting it one day, just saying to yourself, oh, I'm going to try and just go for the tops of the grass, taking the
Mm.
fault and feeling the opposite. I'll often do that. My stock shot, if I'm not thinking of anything, I dig a little too deep, a
Mm.
couple of grooves high in the face, and it's a little fat. So I'm always on when I'm on the golf course, I'm trying to make swings where I'm just clipping the top of the grass and then I go in with that feel.
Picking it.
And I kind of adjust it from there. So it's very external, very simple, and it's an easy way of changing ground contact location as
Mm.
well. Like I said, if you're hitting 2 inches behind, and then you try to just clip towards the top of the grass, not only will you hit a thinner divot, but the divot will also start more forwards as well.
Mm.
So
Mm.
it's a great simple focus that gets ground contact.
My experience with a lot of this, I mean, is that when you get people focusing externally like this and you do influence, as we said before, the scene of the crime, better movement emerges as a result of that. But the
Mm.
flip side of the coin is you can work endlessly on the movement and not necessarily influence the impact.
Yeah, well, think about arc depth, right? The thing we just talked about, how deep your club is moving through the grass. If you think about, well, what are the contributing factors to that mechanically? Like,
Mm.
say someone wanted to solve this problem mechanically.
Yeah.
Well, your knee flex, your ankle flex, your
Yeah.
hip flex, any one of the, how many vertebra do we have? 20, 20, 50? I don't know. Any one of the vertebra, if they flex over a little bit, the scapular retraction, protraction, the elbow flexion, whether the wrist release
Right.
earlier or later, all of those are contributing factors to how deep that club swings through.
Yeah.
And the problem is, even if you were able to lock in on one and minimize variability in that one, well, the other 10 variables, 20
Mm.
variables we mentioned, they all go out of whack now. They're not working together because you've given your brain a go. Our brains will work on whatever we give it, right? If we
Mm.
say, right, lock that elbow in, which
Mm.
is a bad thing to think of anyway, but if we say, let's lock that elbow in, now the knees are going to change more, or just the synergy between the movement goes off.
Mm.
Whereas then the irony is if we give our brain the goal of let's swing the club through impact the right height. Yes, we're not going to get it perfect every time, but we'll do better at that job.
Mm.
And then if we were to analyze the movement, we'd see, oh, our body is doing it differently each
Mm.
time. If
Mm.
you had the capability to look, to millimeter accuracy, which we don't really have that yet, you'd see that with the best players, they're performing that task of hitting the ground in the right place differently every single time,
Mm.
with meaningful differences as well.
Mm.
And when a pro plays a punch shot, or they're playing a picky long iron, or they're trying to draw it or fade it, there's huge differences in the movement that they're making,
Mm.
but the task is still there. The difference is for a pro, those tasks that impact are ingrained and they're good.
Mm.
A pro often doesn't have to think about hitting the ground in the right place because they just do it, right?
Do it.
It's like survivorship bias, right? If they weren't doing it, they wouldn't be pros, but
Yeah.
because they are doing it, they are pros. And there are some pros who are more conscious of it. In fact, this is a really interesting one. Bryson DeChambeau, who's probably known for being the most technical golf pro. He actually has a video on YouTube where he's doing all these simple tasks that we've talked about. He's like, look, this is how you hit more off the toe. I practice hitting off the toe, practice hitting
Really?
off the heel. I use some tape behind the ball to look at my ground contact.
Mm,
I try and hit it more. There was Padraig Harrington as well. Oh,
mm,
yeah, you need to hit it more right, more left, and then hit it
mm,
straight. So start playing with this. So I love that because while they're stealing my thunder a little bit, because they're doing my job for me. I'm like, okay, this is helping people because to see technique based players like Bryson and
mm,
Podrick, who's a technical nut as well, to
mm,
see them doing the instinctive feel based stuff, I think is a very powerful lesson for the average golfer.
mm. And that's fantastic, that, because the assumption would be that Bryson's just inside his head giving himself 53 different swing thoughts, and the reality, as you described there, is clearly very different. Would you say this winter, Adam, that then for people to develop these skills, it's about going to the range and having a different relationship to outcomes and a different relationship to perceived failure, and being willing to see balls fly left and right and high and low and all that, as opposed to standing there with a prescribed movement that you're trying to get right, hoping then a good ball flight comes out as a result?
Yeah, play more. So yeah, I mean the tasks that everybody can do, get on the range or even in a net. If you're stuck indoors in a garage or you've got a net at home, get some foot spray, get some Dactarin in the UK, Dr. Scholl's or CVS in the US. Spray the face, just a light spray, and yeah, spend some time hitting half of the shots on the toe, half of the shots on the heel, or maybe a third from each. Then finish it with centered strikes.
Mm,
And you'll start to notice you may have a bias in there, which just doing that drill in itself will help reduce the bias. But at least you'll learn, if you are a toe biased player like I am myself, you'll know now, oh, this is what it takes for me to hit more towards the heel. Maybe I actually have to go out and play thinking hitting it a little from the heel in
mm,
order to get sweet spot strikes. Feel isn't real. And then look at the vertical strike as well. Maybe try and hit a little higher on the face, a little lower on the face. If people don't like these feels, because it can sometimes be a bit jarring to hit the wrong part of the face, just do it with a foam golf ball. You'll still
yeah.
get the same result, just it won't feel horrible. And then spend some time hitting a little bit more right and a little bit more left. Line up exactly the same, set up the same, but see if you can, do a couple of little rehearsals for what you want impact to be.
Mm,
Get your mind locked onto it by rehearsing it and see if you can present the face a little open, a lot open, an extreme amount open, and then do the same for left as well. So play a little bit with this, especially in winter now, because I think the big fear for people is, oh, well, if I do this, aren't I going to mess up my swing?
yeah.
And that would have been something I would have said 20 years ago. But now after doing this for well, maybe 15 years, I've been doing these type of drills.
Mm,
It doesn't mess your swing up at
mm,
all. It gives you so much control over your swing. And the interesting thing, people can do this as well, is video. If you are frightened of it messing up your mechanics, video your swing doing the toe and heel drill or the higher and lower on the face drill, and you'll see there's hardly any change in your
yeah. Yeah.
mechanics, really.
Mm,
Um, which is interesting, right? Because as a coach, for several reasons, I don't post results. I don't post swing changes with my players. Now, sometimes we get swing changes, but often we don't. A player will come to me and they'll have a very similar movement when
mm,
they leave the lesson as to when they started the lesson. But what I'm concerned with is what did that ball do?
exactly.
Is that ball straighter now?
Yeah.
Is that ball going longer? Is it going to go more? Is it going more consistent distances? Because those are the factors that improve whether we score or not.
Yeah.
And players leave happy because they're like, shit, my ball's going 10 yards farther and it's a more consistent
Mm,
distance.
mm,
And when we look at what we changed, I might have moved their strike 5 millimeters towards the center.
mm,
I might have moved it a groove lower on the face, which is very significant.
mm,
Um, and we might have presented the face maybe 2 degrees more closed. You're not going to see these changes on camera,
mm.
but they are very, very meaningful to the
To the
outcome,
impact.
which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why I define the difference between macro technique and micro technique. What I just talked about is micro technique, small changes that make a huge difference versus what everybody else is working on, which is macro technique. Can I turn my shoulders an extra 10 degrees? Can I get my arm plane different?
Mm.
Um, those things can work as well, but um, there's lots of downsides to that.
It's I suppose we're battling in many ways, Adam, against the sort of visual world that we're in, and you get
Mhm.
so much on all the media, social media channels. Look at this backswing here, and he's had a lesson, and look how much
Yeah.
better. And I just think, what the hell has that done to? Has it really made that player better? Has his ball flight improved? Is he more consistent with his strike location? All those things, because that never gets posted, does it? It's just the aesthetics of how it looks.
Yeah, it annoys me to be honest because I've seen those lessons. I've done those lessons, right?
Mm.
Where you take a swing that's horrible looking and you make it prettier. And yes, you can post that on Instagram and get 1,000 likes, but what was that ball doing?
Mm.
I've seen swings get a ton better aesthetically
Yeah.
and hit the ball a hell of a lot worse as
Worse.
well. And
Yeah.
a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, but that maybe that's just temporary." Sometimes it's not.
No.
Sometimes that player does
No.
hit it better. I've seen loads of players go down rabbit holes. Probably the best ever swing I've seen mechanically, as far as when I say best, as far as it goes to looking like a certain model, right? Was also from a player who was struggling. They were a decent player, but they couldn't break through. And you look at their swing and you say, how is this player not number one in the world?
Mm.
But I could go out as a teaching pro, plays once a month and beat that player.
Yeah.
Um, he just didn't have control of the golf ball. His macro technique looked perfect, but his micro technique was just off. And in fact, his micro technique was probably being harmed by the fact he was so internal and position
Yeah.
oriented.
Yeah.
And I see so much stuff on Instagram as well where, coaches, I don't want to denigrate coaches, but when they're talking about, well, there's a lot of information on this is how to make your swing look better.
Mm.
Oh, you need to fix your takeaway here.
Mm. Mm.
It's like, what is a fixed takeaway really?
Yeah.
Is a fixed takeaway to have it symmetrical looking? It's like,
Mm.
well, so was John Daly wrong for
Yeah.
having that takeaway that was behind his backside at
Floyd.
peak?
Ray Floyd. Was he
Ray
wrong?
Floyd, Nancy Lopez,
Yeah.
all those guys sucked it in. Who has like 7, 8 more order of merits? Colin Montgomery. Was
Mm.
his outside takeaway wrong? I take the club away
Yeah.
outside. I hit it great. I hit it better taking away outside.
Mm.
I spent years trying to make my takeaway look textbook and hit it horrible.
Mm.
My game came on leaps and bounds when I allowed my takeaway to be more outside the line.
Yeah.
Again, it wasn't a conscious thing. I actually had the goal of to get my club to work through impact differently, and my body just said, "Well, this is the
This
way I
is the
want you to
best
do it."
route.
And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, and I resisted it for ages because I was like, "Oh God, I don't like the look of that." But then I was like, "Ah, screw it. I'm hitting
Mm.
it so well. Why not?"
Mm.
Um, you got Matt Wolf takes it. There's loads of players take it away. Ricky Fowler was great, right? When he took it away outside the line, laid it off at the top. He was awesome, and then his swing slowly over years evolved to probably a more model look, and he's not really as good anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and, you don't hear about those stories on tour as well because those players are selling cars for a living or on mini tours now.
Yeah.
But it happens a lot. So yeah, looking at the macro and just be careful when, there's instruction out there saying this is how to fix your swing, this is how to fix early extension, this is how to. It's like, yeah, you might be able to fix that, but whether you play better at the end
It's a
of it is a
different
different
story.
story.
Yeah.
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 And often, I'll get someone to hit it better by focusing more externally and more on the task of impact. And sometimes their swing does look better,
Mm.
but it wasn't a conscious
No.
conscious decision. So, I've had players who maybe suck the club way inside the line and they maybe worked for years on trying to get the club more online. And I just stick my ball with the nail through it on the ground. So I got a golf ball with a nail driven through it, and I angle it more to the left, and all of a sudden their path is better and their takeaway looks better, and they weren't even thinking about it.
Exactly.
So sometimes we can get the movement to self-organize for free. But on the other end of the scale, I've had players who we get their impact better, and maybe their takeaway looks a little worse in
Mm,
terms of a model, right?
mm,
But we're like, well, you're hitting it better. So what do
mm,
you want? You want to
mm,
look pretty, or do
mm,
you want to hit the ball better?
mm.
So yeah, same for me, right? Did I want my takeaway to be online, or do I want it to be outside the line to hit the ball better? I could, flight that ball exactly how I wanted it with the outside the line takeaway. So I made that decision. It's not easy. I
No.
understand for people if they're ingrained in doing things the right way, it's very difficult to take that
The,
leap.
the pull of aesthetics and how it looks is very, very powerful, isn't it? Especially in the world that we're in. But I often say to players, you play golf on a golf course, not a catwalk. They don't say, well, Adam, you shot 76, but we'll knock you two off because you actually look better at the first part of the P1 or P2 or whatever. So it ultimately comes back to the shots that you hit. What is going to cause the shots to be hit is your impact location, is your impact conditions. If you're not paying attention to that, chances are that you're trying to solve a mystery, but not you're in the wrong room, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, we like symmetry. There are biological reasons why we like
Mm,
symmetry, right? We like symmetrical faces. They're more attractive to us. And so it makes sense that symmetrical swings would be more attractive to us as well. But um, I always say pretty isn't always
effective.
good for you.
Mm.
There's plenty of pretty women out there who will drain your bank account and ruin your life. And there's plenty of pretty flowers out there that are poisonous as well. And so I think that chasing aesthetics in the golf swing could be more likened to that, especially if it becomes the goal above impact,
Mm.
you know.
Mm.
Yeah, if you're chasing aesthetics, I know players who do this, they can hit the ball well with a swing that they don't like the look of, and then they go and chase a prettier swing, and they're quite happy to hit it
Absolutely.
horribly,
But it looks better.
just to look better. And it's
Mm.
like, the promise or the light at the end of the tunnel is always, oh, once you ingrain this, you're going to hit it better. And it's not always true. I've seen it happen 1,000 times. I've seen swings get beautified and the
Yeah.
player never recover from it as well. So I mean, if you are ever going to go down a swing mechanics change, I would do it with a highly qualified golf instructor who knows how those changes influence impact.
Mm.
But ultimately, impact is the goal, and I feel like, based on my experience, intent and an external focus of the task is the best route to achieve this.
Yeah. I think the most powerful force you can take onto the golf course is that of clear intention.
Yeah. Well, it's all encompassing as well because, like, say you go a mechanical route, say you're shanking it one day, well, there could be 100 different technical reasons for it.
Mm.
And even if you were to fix one, well, next day you come and you're shanking it for a different reason. Next day you come and you shank for a different reason. You're in constant fixes. Whereas if you just develop the ability to hit it more out of the toe through intent, that tool will always be
Always
relevant
be
for
there.
you. It's
Yeah.
always something you go towards. And it's like, if you're going to master a skill at anything, do the one thing that will always be relevant, like intent. Basically, I've spent the last 10 years of my life just mastering, can I hit it more toe or heel? Can I hit the ground fatter or thinner? Can I hit it more left and right?
Mm.
So those three tasks, if you spend 10 years mastering those three things, you're going to get awfully good at them.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to spend 10 years to get good at them. A lot of gains can be made in the first few sessions of doing those, but 10 years of doing that, you're going to just master it. You won't need anything else. Whereas if you're talking about the swing, well, there are even reports of Tiger Woods saying, yeah, I haven't got my swing exactly where I want it yet. That guy was 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day for
Yeah.
like 30 years, 40 years, and he still didn't get his swing where he wanted it to. You're never going to master that.
Mm.
So I think it simplifies golf to think of it in the terms of those three things. How is my ground contact, and face direction?
Yeah. Adam, absolutely brilliant. I think we're singing off the same sheet, and maybe it's a bit of an echo chamber for us. But I think I think I feel so passionate about it that the work that you do is so good and so needed in a world that people are drowning in information. Anybody who has the ability to simplify things is really, really very valuable. So let people know. I know you've got some great programs. Let people know perhaps the best program to start with that they can work with you, and where they find out about you, etc.
Yeah, I'd say on adamyounggolf.com, I've got the strike plan is probably the best one to start with for most people. So I talk about, striking the center of the face and striking the ground in the right place, so optimizing those two skills, which will give people the biggest bang for their buck for sure. If you're really nerdy and you want to dive into a lot of information, I've got 150 hours of content in next level golf. That's not for everybody, but it's there if you like the sound of my voice, which I don't. Or if you're more of a reader, the practice manual,
Yes.
the ultimate guide for golfers, is my book on Amazon. Is obviously more directed towards practice, but it talks on quite a deep level of some of the stuff that we've talked about, things like the uncontrolled manifold hypothesis, now the brain coordinates movements. So if you like to geek out on that stuff, yeah, the practice manual is a good guide for you.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. So I'm sure we'll have the annual conversation again near Christmas next year, Adam. But thanks ever so much for coming on again. That's been brilliant.
Pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.